Hello and welcome to the Actual Magician's Bookshelf. Yes, I am an actual magician, and in this episode 34 we're going to be covering lesson 2 of a series I'm running on the Occult Kabbalah, or the Kabbalah taken from a Western Esoteric initiatory system perspective. And in today's lesson we're going to be looking at Yesod, we're going to be looking at my own book, The Magician's Kabbalah, and 2 particular points in this: how to practically use Kabbalah in an esoteric manner, or at least the first step in learning how to use practical Kabbalah in an esoteric manner, and also how to deal with demons and evil spirits and the Klippoth. So there's a teaser for a little bit later on in the video, and it may not be quite what you might expect if you have a look at a load of other videos on practical Kabbalah, occultism, dealing with spirits and demons and devils and calling the angels to assist you and so forth. This is sort of where I come from, but not quite where I come from. Over the last 45 years or so, I've developed a slightly different way, perhaps, of seeing these things, of utilising demonic names and the Klippoth and so forth, which is in this book. Now, before we come to that, I just wanted to recommend another set of books if you're interested in reading the Kabbalah from an esoteric point of view, from a Western esoteric occult point of view. I've got a load of books that I can recommend, and in the short videos that I've done over the last year, there's literally hundreds of books on Kabbalah that I've referenced for different aspects of Kabbalah. But very influential on me in my early days, at least, was Warren Kenton, Zev Ben Shimon Halavai. The Way of Kabbalah is one of his books, and this takes what I'd almost describe as a sort of halfway house between occult views of Kabbalah and traditional views of Kabbalah within Jewish mysticism and spirituality. At that end of the spectrum, you have completely New Age appropriations at one end, perhaps, if we can see it that way, different traditions, obviously, of Kabbalah over different time periods and in different places, like the Sephirah tradition and so forth, or the Lurianic tradition, you might say, and various other schools of thinking with Kabbalah. And this is somewhere sort of in the middle, I would guess. Again, that's a rough and ready guide to the way I guess I think about Kabbalah, but perhaps it's useful to think of this somewhat in the middle. So the Way of Kabbalah is if you're only going to buy one book to see if you get on with this, then that's the book I would recommend. It's my very old referenced copy. Obviously, it's been around the block a bit. Then A Kabbalistic Universe is perhaps the next one. And then School of the Soul, I found, again, very useful back in the day, because it's very much about teaching and learning and working with other people in esoteric study, spiritual study, Kabbalah and so forth, the path and its pitfalls. Very useful book. Probably, if you're interested in the Kabbalah, then those 2 books first. But if you're interested in if you're already a little bit along the way, perhaps, then the School of the Soul is really interesting and useful book. And then finally, out of my recommendations, although there's quite a few other books he has written, Kabbalah and Psychology. Again, you can see this is fairly referenced, and that's quite interesting. It's also very interesting to compare this book to the Dion Fortune book, The Mystical Kabbalah, that we looked at in our first lesson, because then it gives you 2 different, parallel, overlapping, contrasting ways of looking at how Kabbalah can be used to map the spirit, the soul, the levels of existence, identification and recognition. Now, in practical Kabbalah that we're going to look at over these lessons, and someone asked a question very kindly in the previous video about practical use of Kabbalah, then we can look at things like permutations of the divine name, talismanic magic, which tends to be the way that Kabbalah is often used in a practical sense, that the Hebrew letters are actually used and the divine names are actually used in terms of protection, in terms of health, in terms of encouraging your studies, in terms of getting divine protection and guidance, and even the usual things like, as we know as tarot card readers, sort of 3 out of every 5 readings will be about love and relationships. So there's Kabbalistic magic for love and relationships. There's Kabbalistic magic for wealth and material goods and things like that, and angelic protection and family matters, medical matters like curing ailments and things like this. Now, that's all well and good in its own sphere. And I use sphere in its generic sense, not to refer to the Sephiroth, as we looked at in our previous lesson. But nowadays, I think that a lot of occultism, a lot of magic is best purposed for dealing with anxiety, dealing with misinformation, dealing with the overwhelm of all of the inputs that we have, dealing with our sense of a loss of agency in a chaotic world. Things like finding our direction, finding our will, finding our place in the world. To be honest, I think all of those things are core to our being in the world. And this is really what Yesod is about, as well as we're going to take a look at specifically in this lesson. So yes, you can look in all of the books, you can look in things like the Magus, things like the books of occult philosophy, Agrippa, and so forth, and you can see the use of Hebrew letters, Kabbalistic structure. You can see the use of angelic names and so forth, which we've talked about with our Gregorian Angels book, which is an entirely parallel system of magic and angelic work, that if you're interested in that, then the Gregorian Angels is perhaps a way to go, because it's in line with all of our other teachings about tarot and correspondence and initiation and so forth. But what we're going to look at today is far more about one of the foundation stones that you need, so that you don't really have to invoke demons for protection or to blight your enemies, or all of the things that basically, to some extent, egotistic power trips and abreactions to the world, as opposed to actually, in terms of how I see Kabbalistic magic at least, and practical Kabbalah, as understanding the world, and then that guiding our actions, our behavior, and our way of being in the world, and our relationship to it. Because to me, Kabbalah is a map of our relationship to the universe, and the more we refine that map, the more we test it, the more we utilize it, the less need there is for the sort of dealing with all of the curses and Klippoth and all of the negative influences that often, too often, I think all too often, occultists from a particular angle of approach into magic, and particularly because it's popular on social media and so forth, tend to deal with. I don't think that is to be brought to the forefront of our work and our studies. I think there's foundational stuff that we can do to circumnavigate some of that, or direct ourselves straight through it and not get enmeshed in it, because in that moment that you believe that you need to exert that esoteric influence into the world, your soul is then lost because you're dropping it down into the place that you actually are being taught by the experience itself to arise through, to understand a bit more about our relationship to the universe. And then that's just my belief, that's my approach, that's my experience over the last 45 years. And obviously some of these things do have their place at certain times, and I've not been remiss myself in utilising magic in that sense over the years. So let's take a look at your next study, and the next thing I would recommend to learn, as we looked at in our first lesson, and again go back to that if you haven't seen it, it's foundational to this second lesson. We were talking about learning the names of the Sephirah and learning the correspondences of the tarot to the paths. Fairly straightforward, you just have to learn 10 names, be able to draw a diagram of 22 lines and 10 circles, and what was the other thing we looked at, and correspond the 22 major arcana to those paths. So it shouldn't take too long to actually get that learnt. And you can learn the bottom bit of the tree. If you find that easier, here's the correspondences, here's the names of the Sephirah, and then learn the middle bit, learn the top bit, and so forth, or you can learn the middle pillar, whatever works for you best. Now, the next thing that I would suggest learning is actually something that I think is fairly unique to my particular approach. I learnt it from my second esoteric teacher, who hadn't really learnt Kabbalah at that time. We sort of learnt it together, but I think my enthusiasm for it inspired his teaching, and he brought a lot more experience into it back when I was in my late teens. And that is to learn the actual spellings now. So you may have learnt Keitha, Hokmah, Bina, Darth, Hesed, Gibora, Tifreth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. But then these are Hebrew words, of course. Keitha means crown. And in this book, I've actually given some of the variant meanings of the titles of the Sephirah, because some of these are quite interesting in terms of language, in terms of relating to the Sephirah. But then, and I've transliterated it into English for ease of convenience, here, ease of convenience, for ease. Keitha is spelled Kaf, Tau, Resh, 3 letters, 3 Hebrew letters. And Bina, for example, is Beth Yod Nun Hey, and Darth is Daleth Ayin Tau. So each of these names of the Sephirah have their transliteration into English and their spelling in Hebrew characters. Why is that interesting? Why is that useful? Why is that important? Well, because it builds a foundation up from what you've already learned. Now, here is your first practical use of applying the correspondences. And whilst it doesn't seem practical in the sense of casting a spell, for which the several other videos that I have on creating a spell, and now you'll be able to bring this into those videos, but it is very, very practical, and we'll come on to why. Now, we're going to take as our example Yesod. So Yesod means foundation, and we looked a bit at Malkuth last time round, and now we're going to look at Yesod in our second lesson. And here, for example, in the book are the Hebrew letters themselves, and the meanings of the Hebrew letters and the values as well. I tried to use this book as my own reference book, and then we've got the correspondences as well to the tarot and so forth. So let's take a look at a tree of life, and we're going to talk about Yesod. Let me get back into my position here. Okay, so on the Tree of Life, we have Yesod and Malkuth down at the bottom. We looked at Malkuth, the kingdom, last time round. And more importantly, we looked at the world card. Let me use a pointer here. The world card as being the illustration, really, of the universe, that the universe is in effect here. It's on the path. This world, the world of experience that we are sensing at the moment, is not Malkuth. It is not Yesod. It arises out of the relationship and interaction of Yesod and Malkuth. And that is taught to us. The lesson of the card is the lesson of the path, which is the world in between Yesod and Malkuth. So this is where we are here on the map. We're on this path in between the unknowable expression of Yesod, which is a divine expression coming down the Tree of Life, and our path, our journey through all of the paths. So we are all of the paths. And as a result, we are all of the major arcana. We embody them, we live them, our relationship through the world is expressed by them. We have this template, and when we apply this template, this is the real world, the divine world, truth, and utterly unknowable in a sense, because we can only perceive it through our interaction of it with our sense of identity, and then our awareness, and then our very being itself as we ascend through the lessons of the paths. So we don't always learn the lessons at the same time. We don't necessarily finish learning the lessons as we go up, and we have to keep consolidating all of the lessons that are now technically behind us. It's very foolish to think that we have ever learned all of our lessons fully. There's always more to be taught with each lesson. And so Yesod means foundation. So Malkuth is the pendant at the end of the universe, like the restaurant at the end of the universe, that is constantly in Kether. These are one and the same. Right at the extremes, they're the same. It's only in these levels of separation that we exist. And so our very first experience in occultism is a weird experience, is something out of the ordinary, something beyond what we can explain, something esoteric, something magical, or just a sense that the world is more than it appears. And this is a sense of fragmentation, separation, dissonance, really, between Yesod and Malkuth being expressed in our being, in the world itself. And so we have to come to find out more. So we have to go into the structure of our psyche. And some people do it through self-development, self-awareness, mindfulness, occultism, yoga, some spiritual teaching, some New Age teaching, some Eastern teaching, Western teaching, whatever it might be, astrology, the I Ching, and so forth. It's basically a way of trying to divine the world beyond science, beyond psychology as we know it, beyond chemistry. We then start to look at alchemy and its symbolism and things like that, for which see several other videos. But it's that dissonance that we're trying to realign. And there is a sense in Kabbalah, in traditional Kabbalah, that often what we're trying to do is restore the light. We are trying to return the divine name to its original spelling. We are trying to reorganize and put back together something that is broken. And there is a sense of that in Western Esotericism as well, even if it's us that feel broken. So what is Yesod then? Well, none of these things are anything in particular. They are maps, they are descriptions. So even if I say this is this, or this, what is this, then let's just, in our heads at least, constantly try and remember that we're referring to a map and not something that is necessarily as real as anything else. So Yesod means foundation. It also means base ground principle, and it can be used in the sense of compilation. And that's where it's very useful, because compilation is exactly the function of Yesod. It is compiling all of the expressions coming upwards and outwards, and all of those coming from inwards and above. And Yesod is basically compiling them. It has the celestial paths here, the sun and the star. So we have all of the light and the pouring of the waters of truth and duality down here. And Yesod is trying to make sense of them through the path of temperance, the angel, which we're going to look at in a moment, Sephirah, and the world itself, and the kingdom of the divine estate as well. Garden of Eden, in effect. It will end as it began, in a garden. There is a sense of Yesod trying to compile and make sense of that. And this is where we get the idea of the correlation of Yesod with the ego. But the ego is not the thing. It is not a noun. It's actually like the divine. It is a function. It's a process. It's an ongoing arising of something. The ego arises out of our sense of identity, trying to make sense of ourselves, trying to patch our memories together to make a narrative of our own existence and who we are, what we're going to do next, and so forth. Yesod is a busy little bee, is an engine of creation. I once did a pathworking long time ago where I had the experience of Yesod as something I refer to as the clockwork museum. It is always about the past. Our own sense of identity is constantly being rebuilt behind us, not in front of us. And it's happening in a very structured way, and perhaps we don't always understand the workings of ourself, and therefore it's like hidden clockwork that's running the animatronics of the museum. So I refer to Yesod as the clockwork museum for that reason. But here's the practical thing that I would like you to do once you've learned the spellings of the 10 of the Sephiroth. And that is now what we can do, and you can do this in order to learn them as well. I always like to give exercises that are practical in their own sense, but also learning, teaching at the same time in terms of their concepts and what you can then apply this to. Because once you've done this, what we're going to do in a second, you can do it to any Hebrew word, any word in any grimoire, and it will unlock even traditional Kabbalistic methods to you through a Western esoteric approach. And this is one of the little genius points, I think, of my second occult teacher in just looking at this from a very rationalistic, magical point of view. That was his approach very, very much. And that is that if the word is spelt, Yesod is spelt Yod, Samek, Vowel, Daleth, because again, Hebrew doesn't have vowel characters. Those are marked elsewhere, or you just learn the pronunciation. So Yesod is spelled with the Hebrew characters Yod, Samek, Vowel, Daleth. And if you remember our very first lesson, and so this means you can do this really quickly, really easily, right from the get-go, and it's a very advanced Kabbalistic method with permutations and esoteric permutations. A good book on that is actually R.A. Kaplan's Meditation and Kabbalah, where you can open it just about on any page and find ways of immersing yourself in things through combinations, the Kavanagh meditations on the permutations of the Hebrew letters, the divine names and so forth. So you can do that through this method. And again, what I try and do is teach methods that will be useful to you a lot later on, years and years down the line, that these methods will also still bear fruit for you on the tree. So Yesod is spelled Yod, Samek, Vau, Daleth, and we know from our first lesson, correspondences, that each of the Hebrew letters has its own meaning, but it also has its own correspondence to the Tree of Life and to the Tarot. And that's what we can now take a look at. In effect, we have the magical name of Yesod, because it is a magical name, and we can now practically illustrate it through the combination of letters. And that is Yod, Vau, Samek, corresponds to temperance, Daleth, corresponds to the Empress. So Yesod is actually spelt Yod, Vau, Samek, Daleth. Let me just organise those properly for you. There we go. So, just looking at the screen here. So, Yod, Vau, Samek, Daleth, Yesod. Yesod. So, this is the illustration. This is a tarot card reading in effect with everything that you already know if you've come to my esoteric stuff through tarot, which is why I teach tarot, so that we have a language now. Over the last 30 years of teaching tarot, we now have the language out there that we can use to explore the place in which that language is spoken, which is Western Esotericism. So the Hermit, the Hierophant, Temperance, and the Empress are our illustration of Yesod. So now we can learn everything about the functionality, the processes, the lessons, the challenges, and the resources of Yesod through the cards themselves. So the Hermit is the individual, is the self, is the sense of identity that is actually our awareness of our sense of identity and the path that we have been on. This is the inner self in Yesod. The Hierophant is our belief system, is our values, is our superego to some extent, is everything that we have learnt and identified with, which is sometimes very hard to see as we are forward presenting ourselves to the world. It's very difficult to, without a therapeutic approach and somebody else to reflect back on you through therapy or counselling and so forth, which is part of the work of the grade of Yesod as well, is self-discovery, self-analysis, and also third-party analysis as well through counselling and so forth. And then we have the Angel of Temperance. This is the path that unites us to the divine, and we can see that this is also the card that comes out of Yesod on the Tree of Life, just over here. So that is a picture from Yesod of the way up through Tiferet, the sun, which we have here, all the way to Kether, the crown. So here we have the duality of Malkuth. Let's just get that card by itself. The two pillars pouring down, and then we have Tiferet and Kether in the distance. And then when we have the wings of our spiritual ascent as we go up the Tree of Life. And then we have nature itself, the arising unity, but also here we have Yesod as nature as an exemplar, the nature as a sacrament, as a divine showing of whatever the truth of everything is, that we can actually see that through nature, because nature corresponds to Venus, which is the only symbol on the Tree of Life. Draw that on the tree. that is a circle with the cross underneath it is the only astrological glyph that actually covers the whole of the tree of life. And the Golden Dawn point that out to actually say that is because love is unity. And again, going back to our Hebrew, going back to Avavar and Akkad, one means love, one means unity. They both have the same value. Through gematria, it's 13. They both equate with each other, so love and unity are the same, according to that teaching. And as a result, they both add up to 26, which is also the value of Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, which we see actually on temperance itself. The divine name is present in nature. And can you see perhaps where I'm going with this, in the sense of once you have the correspondences and have learnt even the basic correspondences, you can now unlock anything in the universe through tarot, through your illustrations of tarot. And this is where we get to the practical sense of tarot and Kabbalah itself, as we're going to cover in this lesson. So Yesod is basically the foundation. It is the function of the universe to compile reality as we experience it through our relationship to whatever reality actually is. And we're part of that, of course, because you can draw each of the Sephiroth within each other. And this is illustrated by the world card itself. But Yesod is further illustrated through these cards. And now you can go back through all of the Sephiroth, and this is your homework. And the spellings of the Sephiroth, so Netzach is Nun Sadai Cheth, so it's 3 Hebrew letters, and that is Death, the Star, and the Chariot. Death, the Star, and the Chariot. And that will tell you all about victory, which is strangely enough one of the keywords of the Chariot, because all of these things overlap, correspond, resonate, and so forth. And that is basically your homework for lesson 2. And again, you don't have to do these in days or hours. You can do these over a period of weeks. I would recommend doing that. Things like this I did over years and years. So this is how you can now unlock. And now, the more you learn about Hebrew, the more you learn about the language, the more you learn about the correspondences, the more you learn about the tree of life, the more you learn about tarot cards and the meanings of each card and the symbolism, it will all continue to build up. And this is really why it is called the great work, because it is a work, but it's great in the sense of it will allow you to build a relationship to the universe where everything starts to teach you something. Everything starts to fall together in your own coherent system, in your own map. And in terms of finding direction, in terms of reducing anxiety, in terms of improving your agency and so forth, this is where this comes in. Rather than casting a spell for it, which you can indeed do, I think it's best, at least as a foundation, to start to build a coherent system of comprehension of your spiritual existence in the world. And this allows us to then communicate that, to talk with each other about that, and also a bit later on, and particularly as a lot of the mystics were versed in the experience of this spiritual progress and divine creation, even if they weren't using Kabbalah, or some of them like Western Esotericists like Waite and Crowley and Mathers and so forth, this is hard baked into our system. And so by understanding it and learning how to utilize it, it's like learning to pick a lock. We can then unlock an awful lot of other things without too much effort. It's an effort of learning, an effort of perseverance and so forth. But again, the Tree of Life and the Tarot cards can teach us about that as well. Just look up the Hebrew word for perseverance, look up the characters that make up that word, look at the tarot cards for it, and that will teach you how to persevere. That will teach you an illustrated guide to perseverance. You could probably write an entire book just on that, because we have, in Kabbalah, it's called the orchards. And it's like a tree of life within each tree of life. And we can unlock the fractal nature of the universe as a result of that. Now, let's just end with demons and the Klippoth and so forth, and why I'd perhaps recommend The Magician's Kabbalah to you as the next book to have a look at, hopefully to purchase if you want to study along with me. Then here we have, I did a particular section about the Klippoth, about the demonic entities, and my understanding of evil from a Kabbalistic point of view, and in particular the sort of strange conflation of the word Klippoth, particularly through Crowley and through some of the Thelemites and the Grimoire magicians and so forth, as the big bads, as the evil and so forth, and as the spooky, I'm really powerful, I dealt with the Klippoth, or I'll teach you how to become a living god by summoning the ninth realm demon of the fourth abyss and so forth. All very well and good in itself, but not the big picture by a long, long way. In here, we have the names of the Sephiroth, the nature of the Klippoth, and also the name of the Klippoth, or the description of them, and also the kings of the realm. And in, for example, the Abramelin ritual, we have to work with 4 of these, if not all of them, in particular, in order to, in effect, enter into a relationship with them for work, for the work itself. And so we have all of the names. We have Satan, Beelzebub, Lucifer, Ashtaroth, Asmodeus, Belphegor, Baal, Adramelech, Lilith and Nehema, listed here, the big bads of the grimoires. You'll see these in Francis Barrett, the Magus, and so forth, and a lot of occultists talking about them being their sort of patron demons and all of this sort of thing. But here we're looking at them in their overfunction, or their misrelationship, or their unadjusted nature on the tree of life. And I'll give you 2 examples, I think. Kether, we have false gods, and we have Satan himself up in Kether as the Klippothic, or the evil side of that. But these are not the evil side of it, as I explain in this chapter. They are the misapprehension, or the unalignment, and the waste, and the necessary friction of the universe in its creation. And Kether, as the truth, it is then obvious that the flip side of that has to be falsity, false gods. Everything that is not true is the Klippoth of Kether, is the evil, is the thing that we have to avoid being tempted by or tricked by and so forth. And this is Satan. Is it in, what's the name of the film, where there's a line at the end about Satan's greatest trick is to make people think that he doesn't exist, or believe that he doesn't exist, and so forth. The Usual Suspects, that's it. The Usual Suspects, it would be, of course. So false gods is the flip side of Kether. Also, in terms of the Klippothic entity, it is the dual contending forces, the twins of God. So we have this idea of duality and contention here up in Kether. And so everything in your life that feels separative, that feels conflicting, feels abuse of power, all of these things, these are the Klippoth of Kether in your everyday life. If you have an argument with someone, that is Kether being misaligned. And so Kether, Satan, is in your life already in terms of every moment of that. And that is from both summoning Satan into a protective triangle, or having poor Victor Nuremberg in a magical triangle, and your Aleister Crowley in your circle, and you're summoning Coronas on the demons of the depths into poor Victor, and then communicating with him. This is actually present in our everyday life, in our real life, and we have to work with that and contend with it and learn from it and eventually work through it so that it no longer exists, or that we are aware of it, that we comprehend it as part of the whole system. And so this is how I would start to work with Lucifer and Satan and Ashtaroth. For example, Ashtaroth is the Klippoth of Yesod, in the sense of Yesod is loving kindness, mercy, and forgiving our enemies, and Ashtaroth is the revenger of wickedness, those that are crooked, the breakers in pieces, the smiters. So every time that you feel aggrieved about something, Ashtaroth is at work. And so what we have to do is rise to Yesod in order to learn and face off with Ashtaroth. And Yesod, of course, is spelt in a particular way. So then we can look at Yesod and find that that is the chariot, temperance, and the empress in tarot through Yesod, through our correspondences, that we learnt already in lesson 1. So lesson 2 is already how to deal with Beelzebub in your life, the lying spirit, by thinking about Chokmah, learning the lessons, the resources and the challenges of Chokmah, by looking at the spelling of Chokmah, looking at the meaning of Chokmah, and then looking at the tarot cards and everything that you need to know about dealing with that is there. And then, as we'll look at in our next lesson, we're going to take a look at where we will go from there. We will go to, you can see we've done Malkuth, Yesod, and we'll either move over here and look at Hod, and then go to Netzach and end with Tifereth, because I'm only going to cover the bottom of the Tree of Life in these lessons. Or we might go up to Tifereth and finish that, and then look at Hod and Netzach in a separate lesson. So when we look at Hod, we're then going to look at then how to activate the tarot cards in a practical sense. If you do want to do a ritual, a Kabbalistic ritual for protection, for guidance, for healing, and so forth, we'll take a look at that in the next section. But first of all, look at the cards and look at your understanding of the Sephiroth. It's no use learning to drive a car. Well, it is, but in the sense of if you don't know how to read a map, every time you take that car out, every time the Grimoire magician is summoning this, that, and the other, or showing you how to do a talisman for this, that, or the other, or how to achieve great power in your life, that might be putting you in a high-powered car, but unless you have a map, and unless you know where you want to go, how do you know that you're getting to where you're going, that you're doing it right, in a sense? Because this is how the devil works, this is how evil works, and this is why I recommend starting with the absolute basics. It's very boring, and then we can build from there, and it's easy to do it. It's a lot easier in the long run than screwing up your life time and time again with magical workings for wealth and finance and relationships and so forth, and then having to keep doing that because you're changing things in a way that is not conducive to creation. It's not conducive to balance and reality itself. So the Magician's Kabbalah is where I put my thoughts on the matter. If you're interested in those, then they're all hidden inside a book. And in our next lesson, we're going to look at either Tiferet or Hod and Netzach. I try and look at those as a pair because that's quite useful. And we're going to look at some practical ways of using our Kabbalah as well. But the first practical way is having it as a map. There's no better tool in your magical armament than a map. And I think that's where we'll leave it. So until next time, thank you for joining me in this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.